What are the challenges that in the state of power sector you guys face, and drill down a little more on that?
The power space has always been a very vital sector for any economy and any economy's growth. It has never been more so for a country like India, which continues to be on the growth path. I think the whole paradigm of energy has changed. 30 years ago, whenever anybody said energy, the picture that came to your mind was oil, gas. Today, the moment anybody says energy, the first picture that comes to your mind is electricity.
Absolutely.
Not just every industry, but also every consumer looking at moving to electricity as their primary source of energy. And this is what is actually resulting in this massive growth today.
Welcome to this yet another episode podcast done by Invest UP, where we interview the industry captains across Uttar Pradesh, how their experience has been. And in that queue, we're now here with Shri Vinamra Agarwal, Joint Managing Director of Technical Associates. Hi sir, how are you doing?
Hi, very well. Thank you for having me here.
Great, wonderful. Let's dive right into a quick brief about yourself. How's your company been, and how are you placed out of the state of Uttar Pradesh?
Sure. Thank you very much. Technical Associates Transformers, my company, is a company that's very proudly based out of Lucknow, Uttar Pradesh. We've been here for the last 55 years. We're in the business of manufacturing power transformers for power retransmission grids across the country and the world. We have largely been manufacturing out of our facility here in Lucknow. For a brief period, we also expanded and set up another facility in Uttarakhand, in Sitarganj, about 15 years ago. And now we are on our way to setting up yet another greenfield facility in Uttar Pradesh itself, about 20 kilometers away from Lucknow. And that is going to be our flagship facility for serving the needs of power transformers, not just in India, but also in overseas markets.
Wonderful. Your journey has been long. I've worked with you as well, for that matter. I've seen the kind of work and your, presence in the system, how you've driven it. What are the challenges that, as yourself in the industry, in the state of power sector, you guys face, and how drill down a little more on that?
Sure, thank you. So the power space has always been a very vital sector for any economy and any economy's growth, and it has never been more so for a country like India, which continues to be on the growth path. This is a sector that's also had to face its fair share of turbulence in the past. The inefficiency of our distribution companies, the inability of many companies to be able to secure their payments timely from customers, the fact that most of the power sector was very heavily dominated by customers who were government customers, transmission distribution companies. All of that led to severe challenges over the last 55 years. And that's been the reason why in many cycles in the last 55 years, at least since our company's been growing, we've been seeing challenges in the ecosystem which have led to kind of existential threats for the entire industry per se. However, I think today we are at a crossroads where this sector can perhaps be called a sunrise sector for the entire industry. A couple of things have changed. Number one, I think the whole paradigm of energy has changed. And if you think about it, 30 years ago, whenever anybody said energy, the picture that came to your mind was oil, gas, coal, right? Today, the moment anybody says energy, the first picture that comes to your mind is electricity.
Absolutely, right.
And whether it is the whole movement on decarbonization, sustainability, the growth of renewable energy as a source of power, or the fact that gradually every industry is now looking at moving to electricity as their primary source of energy. Not just every industry, but also every consumer is looking at moving to electricity as their primary source of energy. And this is what is actually resulting in this massive growth today. Today, not just in India, but I think across the world, we are seeing power as being the biggest requirement for any economy to grow. One is decarbonization, which is of course backed by this huge investment that's going into renewable energy. Sustainability, reduction of carbon emissions, etc. is the other big factor that we see in economies like Europe. And most importantly, this huge rise that we are seeing in AI and the use of and data analytics is a hugely dependent, well, the entire phenomena is hugely dependent on availability of clean, affordable, reliable power supply. And as a result of this, the demand for transformers has never been larger than it is today. To give you a few numbers, the Indian transformer industry is today expected to be roughly a $4 billion market today. And one of the very few sectors that is expected to show consistent 10% year-on-year CAGR growth to almost reach a size of $8 billion in the next 5 to 8 years. And I think that represents a significant opportunity not just for OEMs like me, but also to put it in a larger context for even states like Uttar Pradesh, which are now looking at industrialization with a renewed vigor.
Right. Well, those are staggering numbers, to be really honest. UP is a huge state, right? And we just talked about how you have state in other states as well. How is UP as how do you seek it? Because the visions are large. People have started putting in a lot of, and the way that we've seen even FDI for that matter has grown immensely now. How do you perceive Uttar Pradesh in the next coming 15 years?
Oh, I think it can only look up from where we stand today. It has been said for a very long time, we are 1/6 of the country's population. If UP doesn't grow, India cannot grow, right? And with what we've been seeing over the last 5 to 10 years in terms of the renewed focus that the government is bringing in terms of development of the state, I think it's a very positive sign. Also, if I can be honest, I think there's a lot of catching up that we need to do with the rest of the country. And why there is that need to catch up, that also means that the opportunity for transformational growth is far higher in Uttar Pradesh than it is elsewhere. So with probably far lesser investment, we can achieve multiples where another state will only be able to achieve incremental percentage-based growth.
Any sectors that come to your mind? And of course, we've spoken about power, energy, electricity. Any other sectors that you think are under?
So agri, of course, is very big in UP. With this large population, any sector that looks at domestic populations being large consumers of its products and services will definitely have a great market going for it. Last, but definitely not the least, if I purely talk about investment potential or the sectors that have the potential of making it big in UP, you must also consider the fact that as a state over the last 55 years, 75 years since independence, we have largely been a net exporter of manpower to the rest of the country and the world.
Yes.
Right? And that's the reason why you see maximum flights going out from Lucknow, for example, internationally, are only to those markets where traditionally labor has traveled to for either being construction, Saudi, Middle East, GCC, Southeast Asia, in all those areas, right?
Correct.
Now, I think from that perspective, any industry that is also labor intensive, I think has a huge future in Uttar Pradesh because we have this large pool of labor that it needs employment, it needs to be constructively employed, productively employed, if I may say so. And at the end of the day, I think it's a common phenomenon across the world that ultimately people do like to go back to where their roots were, where they came from. And I think all of these sectors have tremendous amount of potential to really prosper in you.
See, geopolitically, the state of Uttar Pradesh, of course, is a landlocked state, and everybody's aware of that. There are, yes, challenges. There are weaknesses as well, which we totally agree on. How do you think, like the Prime Minister says, Aapada mein avsar, how do you think UP can go ahead and, remove that landlocked angle? Do you think, because we know the answer, to be really honest, but as for you, as an industrialist here, as someone who's being the industry captain, how do you think UP as a landlocked state, how is it strategically located if it is, or if it is landlocked, how it's, up to the challenges? How do you seek that in the next, let's say, 10 years?
So, I think with the great work that's happening in the country on infrastructure development, whether it's on the dedicated freight corridor or the massive network of expressways and highways being built where UP is actually being a leader across the country, I think the challenge of logistics is becoming lesser and lesser day by day. Of course, there are always advantages for consumer-focused industries to be closer to their centers of consumption So that by itself is a huge opportunity for companies. Let me put it differently. Today, we are in a very unique situation in India where most of the growth story of India, where we're talking about 7 to 8% GDP growth year on year, is being driven largely by domestic demand, internal consumption, and not by exports.
Right.
And this is the way we foresee it's going to go for at least the next 10 to 15 years to 20 years if we have to, reach the Viksit Bharat dream that we've all been dreaming of.
2047.
And in that perspective, as a country, we don't really care too much about global headwinds. Today, we know the world is in turmoil right now, but things are far better off in India than they are in the rest of the world. And even in other such situations where there has been massive global challenges, India has been fairly relatively insulated. COVID as an example, the way we jumped back from COVID, it took economies far, far longer to jump back from COVID, right? I think a similar scenario probably holds true for UP within the national context. Because we have so much of demand coming from the state itself, there is very little that happens elsewhere in the country that can perhaps affect us, number one. Number two, for companies setting up here, looking at perhaps exporting their products outside the country, logistics could definitely be a bit of a challenge where they would perhaps feel that they need to be closer to a seaport or a railway head. But then I think what is happening in terms of the dedicated freight corridor or the expressways are going to make a difference. For us, this was definitely a point of concern when we wanted to expand and set up a new facility. But then again, since we deal with large capital equipment, which are already fairly expensive capex equipment, the cost of logistics of, let's say, transporting from a Lucknow to a Nhava Sheva versus from a Vadodara to a Nhava Sheva are roughly comparable, and they're not that big a deal as far as the cost of the overall equipment is concerned.
Do you think Jewar will probably make a change now that it's come up? The Prime Minister just inaugurated that at the airport.
Jewar will definitely make a change. I think so. Number one, I think, with all due respect, I think Delhi airport has been overly congested. Also, by virtue of the fact that Delhi airport existed in a different state, there were some challenges with regards to logistics movements as well. I think from that perspective, Jewar will definitely make a huge difference, and especially for people who are working in products or commodities which are perishable, which need super efficient supply chains or logistics chains. I think it's going to be a real game changer for
Right. Let's come back to InvestUp. It is a facilitating agency. We're all aware of it. It's been in the state, newly formed after 2019, earlier was on Swallow Udyog Bandhu. There's a focused vision, and of course, if I rolled out from the top, the Honorable Prime Minister wants India to be the $5 trillion economy. UP states has to be the first $1 trillion state. We want to be $1 trillion, of course, at the earliest, and with the level of how we say it's 75 janpat, 18 mandal, and at that level of population, it's 24 crores. How do you think, in particular, InvestUp has facilitated you as an investor, as someone who's been in the state from the dawn of time? How do you think that has happened?
So there's definitely been a massive transformation. From the time where any industrialist, any businessman was seen more as a generator of taxes and government revenues, to a time where investors and industrialists are being seen as partners in the growth and the development journey of the state, I think that's a massive transformation. Personally, we've had a wonderful experience with InvestUp in the last 2 years since the time we've conceptualized this project. And I remember it was Mr. Anup Chand Pandey, who was the IDC who probably initiated many of these changes. Then he went on to become the Chief Secretary. The first time we heard him say at an Udyog Bandhu meeting that the industrialists or the businessmen in UP need to be the brand ambassadors for UP. I think that was a hugely welcome announcement, and that was perhaps the first time that we heard something along those lines. And that reflects a change in the mindset. So InvestUp today, I think, in terms of the facilitation, in terms of assisting entrepreneurs with facilitation of any licenses, permissions, permits, has played a huge role in easing the journey. However, if I may add to it, I think there is still a lot of road that needs to be
Right.
traveled. So we've seen a very positive change in the attitude and the mindset. And the Honorable Chief Minister himself has been driving this change in terms of the effort that he is putting into bringing a new industry, in terms of the KRAs, the KPIs that he's setting for his bureaucrats as well. And that's a very welcome change. However, I do believe that a lot more work needs to be done in terms of bringing greater alignment on this mission with the working bureaucracy, which is actually the level where work gets done. So today, industries need to contend with land, with revenue officers on a daily basis, especially where, for example, in our case, we did not have the option to go in for land provided by the Industrial Development Corporation or by Invest UP because our requirement was slightly more complex. So we had to go in for private acquisition of land. And that creates a lot of challenges by itself. So on one hand, you have the entire revenue machinery, which needs to be aligned. On the other hand, once you've done the acquisition of the land, and there are multiple permissions, facilitations that are required, whether it is NOCs for MAP approvals or for fire or for water or for electricity. And there, while the overall messaging is very, very positive, I think that's where a little bit of work needs to be done in terms of sensitization, facilitation of the ground level machinery. I think if we were able to achieve that, the sky is the limit for us.